They say these boxes have a 1 in 8 chance for a golden booster. Unless you're me, then it's 1 in 3. Hey yo, what up? Welcome back. Today we're opening not one, but two Kickstarter edition booster boxes. If you're new to Altered, you might be wondering why this Kickstarter edition is special, and that's because it's the first set of Altered. This is how Altered launched, is through Kickstarter. And in this Kickstarter edition box, there are some incentives to make you want to back the Kickstarter edition. In the Kickstarter edition, there were much better odds to pull the unique cards or the chase cards. That's the chase rarity in Altered. Here's a graphic to show you the difference between the Kickstarter edition and the regular display retail booster boxes that you might find in a store. As you can see, you have a much higher chance of opening the unique cards, which is what we're looking for in these packs. Another fun fact about these Kickstarter edition booster boxes is these have 37 packs in them. And here's a comparison for the Trial by Frost booster box. This has 36 packs in it. So you get an extra pack, more chances at uniques. And last but not least, one of the main reasons you want to open these Kickstarter booster boxes is for what the community refers to as a God pack, but Equinox refers to them as golden boosters. And these golden boosters have 10 uniques in them, along with 4 unique foilers. And Equinox, on the back of this box, it even tells you the odds of opening one of those, and it's 1 in 250 packs, so about 1 in 8 booster boxes. By the end of this video, I'll have gone through 3 total Kickstarter edition booster boxes, so that means we'll find at least 2, right? If you're new here, I have an entire playset of all the rares and commons for Altereds Beyond the Gates, so I'm just going to skip through the rares and commons and do reactions to the uniques. I'm also going to do a recap at the end of each box and at the end of the video to go over the uniques that we've opened, kind of stack rank them, and just do some reactions. So I hope you enjoy. Alright, first unique. Foil uniques are always exciting to open. This Loki, the stats are okay. 8 mana, 666 is pretty whatever. But 6 mana from reserve 666 is pretty solid. The From Hand effect, you may send target character to reserve. That's pretty powerful. I mean, if you're paying 8 mana for this character, you really want it to do something useful when it comes into play like that. That seems relatively strong. Now, typically Loki, I'll put a graphic up so you can see what Loki usually does, especially in the rare version. Loki makes each player discard their hand and then draw 3 cards. This one's kind of interesting because at dusk, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. That's cool because you can save a card from your hand before you discard it. I don't think the Loki effect is that strong in general, unless your opponent just has a lot more cards in hand than you, but giving your opponent cards is never something I'm a big fan of. I think this card is pretty whatever. It's way too expensive, but the art is awesome, and the foil is cool, so let's keep going. Second unique, here we go. So this Ratatoskr is super cool. I love the art. The stat line is pretty good. It's 2 from hand, 2/2/1, or 3 from reserve, 2/2/1. So we have a conditional play from anywhere effect. If you control 1 or more landmarks, create an 1/1/1 Ordis recruit in my expedition. That's fine. A lot of the time these Ordis decks don't play a ton of landmarks, so it's not that likely to happen unless you are trying to take advantage of Ubaba's Isba or maybe an Ordis carrier or something. But if you do have landmarks in your Ordis deck, this Ratatoskr seems quite powerful. From hand, you'd come down and make 3/3/2 worth of stats with 1 landmark in play. And if you have a landmark and you play this from reserve, you're making 3 extra tokens. That's a ton of stats and bodies on the board. I think this is pretty good, above average, and the art's really cool, so let's move on. This is a surprise. I actually didn't know you could get these promo 2023 heroes in this. I don't actually know the difference between these promos and the 2024 promos, but this is pretty cool. Definitely a surprise. Third unique. Man, another Bravos unique. Bravos is by far the most uniques that I have of any of them. And I actually don't play Bravos much, so let's give this guy a look. So the stat line is 2 from hand, 4 from reserve, 2/2/2. No effect from hand, but from reserve you may pay 1. I hate seeing that. This card's already very expensive from reserve, 4 mana for a 2/2/2. So if you want this effect, you're going to have to pay 5 mana from your reserve for a 2/2/2. This effect is going to have to be very powerful. So if you pay that extra 1, you may discard target character with hand cost 4 or more. So that's the equivalent of a Keylon Burst. If you're not familiar, I'll have it up on the screen. A removal spell on a character is pretty powerful, but paying 5 mana to remove something like that, in a lot of meta decks, they're not actually playing that many characters at 4 mana cost or higher. So this isn't quite good right now, but maybe in the future when the meta changes, this card will be more powerful. But let's see this next effect. When another character joins your expeditions, you may have target character other than me lose fleeting. This is a convenient effect. It doesn't actually do a whole lot a lot of the time, but the card is cheap enough and has a decent enough stat line that this is playable. This card is just pretty bad from reserve most of the time. It's a good thing this character has a support ability because you're almost never going to do this from reserve effect. The stat line is also terrible from reserve, so you're almost always going to be discarding this to give something a boost. Overall, I think this is a pretty meh unique. A Lyra unique. I don't often open Lyra. I do love that color. So this is 2 from hand, 3 from reserve, 1/4/2. That stat line is kind of crazy. For 2 mana, having 4 in Mountain is pretty powerful, and at least 1 in the other stats. This effect is not something you'd often see in a Lyra card. Having Season, I don't even know if there's any cards in the Lyra faction that outside of uniques that have the Seasoned keyword, so this is pretty cool. This is something you could play in Navinka. Since Navinka oftentimes just puts a counter on a character, this would just be a 2/5/3 by activating Navinka, and it would keep that going to reserve. I think this is pretty powerful as just a value 2 mana character. And this support ability, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand. That's something that Finn wants to do quite often, and Navinka. I mean, Lyra wants to do that a lot with cards like Sleight of Hand. I think this is pretty good. Probably the best unique we've opened so far, but that bar isn't very high. I'm cursed, another Bravos unique. So let's check this thing out. 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 3/3/2. That stat line is already pretty good. And this red does already have this seasoned effect. That is something that the common and rare red already come with. For those of you that don't know, with the season mechanic, if you get a boost or a counter on it, it keeps that counter or boost when it goes to reserve. Usually the stat line being good and having seasoned is mutually exclusive, so this one having a good stat line and seasoned is pretty powerful already. Now the second line here says, when I go to reserve from the expedition zone, if I have 2 or more boosts, sabotage. That's pretty good, because in Altered, at the end of a day, whenever this character goes to reserve, you could sabotage another character on your opponent's side that also went to reserve at the same time. I think this is pretty strong. You'll almost never use the support ability because a seasoned character, you want to replay it with the boosts that it's maintained in reserve. I could see this being really good in like a Basira deck, and probably worth playing. I think this is also one of our best uniques open so far. What do you know? Another Bravos unique. Let's do a gut check. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/4/0. That stat line's pretty solid. It's a little bit worse than a regular Tiny Djinn, but not the worst. The first effect here is when I leave the expedition zone, if you control 1 or more landmarks, put me in my owner's mana zone. This just adds an extra stipulation. Typically Tiny Djinn doesn't have to look for a landmark to activate the effect here of putting it in the mana zone. Adding that stipulation isn't great for Tiny Djinn, but I know Bravos at least plays some landmarks usually. Let's see this second line. At dusk, if I have 1 or more boosts, sabotage. Not the best effect I've ever seen. I'd say this unique is pretty mediocre. Well, this is the last pack of the box, and we have a unique in it. I do love Axiom, so I'm excited to open another Axiom unique. I haven't actually built an Axiom deck, so maybe this one will be one that inspires me. So the stat line is 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/3/2. The stat line's okay. From hand, robots you control other than me gain 1 boost. That can be pretty good. Axiom is often trying to make a lot of robots, and the fact that it can hit multiple robots is pretty powerful. The second line says, when I leave the expedition zone, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If it's a permanent, sabotage. This is so close to being great. If it didn't have that extra stipulation of if it's a permanent, then this card I think would be excellent. Axiom Scrambler typically already has this sabotage effect, so putting a condition on getting that sabotage is not amazing. And as for the support ability, the next character you play this turn gains 1 boost. That is not great in Axiom because a lot of the time they're just trying to make robots. They're not necessarily playing a bunch of characters that they care about putting boosts on. The abilities aren't really very synergistic, so I wouldn't consider this card to be great. Pretty average, or maybe slightly below. Quick recap on this box. I think the best unique is probably the Ratatoskr, or maybe the red. But the most interesting unique, the one that really draws my attention, is the Bravos Pathfinder here. That one's just value, man. I really want to play with that. Let me know what you think, and at the end of the video, we'll come back and recap all of the uniques that we opened. First unique of the box, Joan of Arc. I don't really love Joan of Arc in Altered. Generally, the effects are pretty whatever for me, in my opinion. 5 from hand, 4 from reserve, 4/2/4. Those stats are okay, pretty mediocre. The effect is, when I leave the expedition zone, if you control 2 or more landmarks, create a brass bug 2/2/2 robot token in each of your expeditions. Having that stipulation of controlling 2 or more landmarks is really tough. It's nice that this is an axiom because Sierra especially already wants to play a bunch of landmarks, but having that condition it's going to be really hard, and I think this card is pretty below average, to be honest. The support ability also probably won't come up very often. The next character you play this turn gains 1 boost. Again, Axiom isn't really looking to do that a lot of the time. Especially with the deck you're probably going to be playing this unique in, you're going to be playing a bunch of landmarks, and giving a character a boost is not really what you're looking to do from your reserve. So I think this card is pretty meh, not that exciting. Man, so many Bravos uniques. Let's check this one out. So 4 from hand, 4 from reserve, 4/5/2. Those stats are pretty solid. This is the Council, and this first line says, the from anywhere, from hand, or from reserve triggers of characters facing me don't activate. That is already an effect that the Council has by default, so that's fine. Not really unexpected. The second line here, when another character joins your expeditions, if I have 1 or more boosts, target character gains 1 boost. That's a pretty good effect. In Bravos, it's not really hard to give your characters boosts, and this just spreads them around even more so. So this is kind of a hate piece, what a lot of people refer to in card games, where you're preventing your opponent's cards from activating, and it also gives you an additional benefit. I think this unique is perfectly playable and probably above average. I could see it being played, especially as the meta shifts and if characters become more popular with all of these various effects. I could see this being quite good. Ooh, a Ysmir unique. I've been playing a lot of Ysmir if you've been watching my videos. Lindaway has been my hero of choice lately. So 4 from hand, 4 from reserve, 2/2/3. Those stats are pretty not great, below average. Let's see if this effect is any good. So from anywhere, you may pay 1 additional mana. Not loving that. This card's already expensive to play. If you do, you may send a reserve target character with hand cost 3 or less. That's pretty strong. So that's an off-you-go effect stapled onto a character, but it does cost extra mana. Generally, the best uniques are going to be the ones where you don't have to pay extra mana for an effect like that. It is nice that you can get that effect from both hand or reserve, so it's a little flexible in that way. This second line of text says, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, create a 1/1/1 soldier in my expedition. That's already what Thoth does, at least to an extent. I think these effects are okay, certainly not amazing, and the supportability of After You can be pretty good. Getting that tempo is always something you're looking to do in Altered, and sequencing your cards in a way that makes your opponent expose all of their cards first. It can be powerful. You know, this kind of reminds me of Dorothy Gale, but worse, because Dorothy Gale is just an unconditional send something to reserve, costs 5 mana as a character already. I'm not sure. I don't think this is very good, probably below average. another foil unique. I love the Sneezer Shrooms. The arts are so beautiful. So 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 202. That stat line is okay, but this effect is very powerful. Play from anywhere, I gain anchored. That's something that Spindle Harvesters want, and in Ysmir this can be very good in like an Aphanis deck. This isn't anywhere near as powerful as the Spindle Harvesters that most Aphanis decks are looking for, but it is pretty good if this is what you have access to. In Aphanis, you'd want to take advantage of this card by anchoring it, playing a bunch of spells, and giving it some boosts, and those boosts stick around the following turn, so I think this card is pretty good. And this support ability is, you may return a card from your reserve to your hand. That's also very solid. I think this is one of the best uniques we've opened today. Definitely the best one in this box. Ordish Uniques, let's check it out. So 3 from hand, 4 from reserve, 202. Those stats are pretty whatever, not amazing. Let's see if these effects are any good. When you play it from anywhere, create an Ordish Recruit 1/1/1 soldier token in each of your expeditions. That's very good. The fact that you get this on both sides, playing it from your hand or from reserve, a token in each expedition, that's very powerful. And then from reserve, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. I think those two stat lines together are excellent. I think this is definitely the best unique we've opened today. You don't always have to pay the 1, but if you need the card or if you have the extra mana, I think this card is very, very good. From reserve, the support ability is create an Ordish Recruit 1/1/1 soldier token in target expedition. That's pretty standard. That comes on a lot of Ordish uniques. Overall, I think this is a very, very good Ordish unique. This puts a bunch of statistics on the board and can also draw you a card. Personally, I think the best one we've opened today. Oh my god, we've done it. We've hit a golden booster. No way. First card right here. It's a unique. I knew something was up when I opened the pack and the back card. Typically these back cards are black. They have this black border on them. But when they're white, you know that that's a real card. So that's very exciting. I can't believe we actually hit a golden booster. This is only our 3rd Kickstarter booster box. You're only supposed to get 1 in 8. All right, let's check them out. So first one, Ordish Attorney. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/2/2. When my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, draw a card. There's a lot of stipulations there, so it's kind of hard to evaluate, but the stat line is okay. Drawing cards is always good. It's one of the best things you can do in any card games, including Altered. It says, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, so it's the same thing as that first line, we're going to make 2 Ordish Recruits 1/1/1s in my expedition. You kind of want to play this on a side that you want your opponent to contest on or try and beat you, because it'll draw you a card and make 2 more bodies for the next turn. I think this Attorney is very good. Also, probably top 3 unique that we've opened today, but we've got a lot more to check out in this pack. This is so exciting. Isatok. Isatok is one of my favorite characters in this game. It's just so cool. A bureaucrat deity. What a stat line. So right off the bat, the stats being 7 from hand, 8 from reserve, 2/2/2, that is atrocious. So the effect better be very good. So the first line is, your other expedition and the expedition facing it can't move forward, but played from anywhere, draw 3 cards. Okay, so now I understand why the stat line is absolutely terrible. This is nice because it prevents your other expedition from getting too far behind. Kind of at worst, you're just going to lose one side, and you get to draw 3 cards when you play this. 2 Ordish Uniques back to back that I think are very good. This one drawing 3 cards is absolutely insane. Next unique, here we go, Quetzalcoatl. I love the rainbow art on Quetz. This is such a cool card. So 4 from hand, 3 from reserve, 5/4/3. When an opponent draws 1 or more cards or does resupply, up to 2 target characters each gain a boost. So Quetzalcoatl already does that first conditional effect of when your opponent draws or resupplies, you do something. I don't think this is excellent, but the stat line is very good. 4 mana 5/4/3 or 3 mana 5/4/3 from reserve, both very powerful stat lines. And this effect actually synergizes with its support ability here. So from reserve, you can discard it, and up to 1 target character with hand cost 3 or less other than me gains anchored. Since this Quetzalcoatl wants to put boosts on your characters, it kind of rewards you for anchoring them, and you kind of want to play the anchored characters in a deck like this anyway. I think this is a pretty good unique as well. I mean, all 3 uniques in this pack have been very good. Next unique. I love to see a 1 mana unique, so I hope this is good. Mowgli, 1 from hand, 2 from reserve, 2/1/1. It says, when you play me from reserve, you may pay 1. If you do, target character gains 2 boosts. So it would be 3 mana from reserve, and it would have a stat line of 4/3/3. That's not bad. A 1 mana 2/1/1 is also pretty good, especially for sequencing and getting the tempo that you want. The support ability, I think, is pretty whatever. You may put a card from your hand in reserve. Overall, I think this is a fine unique. I love to see these cheap uniques. Cheap as in mana cost. So 2 from hand, 1 from reserve, Muna Caregiver, 0/2/0. That stat line is pretty mediocre, but Muna Caregiver in general has pretty bad stats, so hopefully these effects are good. So from hand, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, up to 2 target characters each gain a boost. That's pretty powerful. It can choose itself. You don't have to put it into reserve. It's a may, so I think this is pretty good. And then it just has the Muna Caregiver support ability, which is you can discard this from your reserve, and up to 1 target character with hand cost 3 or less gains anchored. Muna plays a lot of anchored characters, and you can put boosts on them, you can re-anchor them. I think this is a perfectly playable unique, and not too bad. Another Bravos unique, heck yeah. So 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 0/2/3. When you play me from reserve, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, target character in your other expedition gains 2 boosts. That's a lot of words, kind of hard to evaluate. So when you play this from reserve, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, target character in your other expedition gains 2 boosts. I don't know how to evaluate this one, honestly. I think it's okay. If you're playing this in a Bravos deck that's playing the Haven landmark, this is going to come out and give a lot of stats if you decide to put something into reserve. I'm not sure. Bravos doesn't resupply much, at least not that I'm aware of, so I don't know. It's hard for me to evaluate this one. The second line of text says, when I go to reserve from the expedition zone, each player draws a card. That's similar to what Kitsune already does. It is cool because when you play this from hand and then it goes to reserve, it does fuel you, so you can activate that, put a card from your hand in reserve, that first line. I don't know. This one's hard to evaluate. I think it could be good. Let me know what you think. All right, next unique. Asmodeus. So 4 from hand, 5 from reserve, 4/6/6. Asmodeus is known for having a thick stat line for his mana cost. And this one is pretty good. 4 from hand, 4/6/6 is very powerful. Another Bravos unique, of course. This says, when you play me from reserve, if you control 1 or more landmarks, roll a die. On a 4+, I gain 3 boosts. On a 1-3, I gain a boost. That's pretty similar to what Asmodeus does in a few different, or in the factions that it exists in already. I think this is pretty powerful. He doesn't do much besides just be a giant meat shield, but the support ability also synergizes with what you'd want to be doing in a deck like this anyway, putting boosts on characters. Certainly not insane, but good enough to play in my opinion. Next unique, Hatter. Man, I'm not used to seeing a cheap mana cost Hatter. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 0/3/5. That's a good stat line. You don't often see 3 mana characters that just put 5 statistic in a zone. When you play me from anywhere, you may have target character other than me lose fleeting. This is pretty good. This allows you to replay your characters. In Lyra especially, you have a lot of characters that you want to replay over and over again, like the Ouroboros Ink Casters. Those like to loop each other, so this one, with the cheap mana cost, it's feasible that you could really start looping your characters and get a lot of value out of this. And the fact that you can get this effect from playing it from anywhere makes it playable in Fen, for example, because this would go straight to your reserve about half the time. And the support ability is not something you often see in Lyra, which is you can discard this from your reserve up to 1 target character with hand cost 3 or less, other than me gains anchored. That's pretty powerful. I do think this card is quite good. In most iterations of the Hatter and other factions, I've never been enticed to play it, but I think this unique is pretty good. I don't know what's going on with these golden boosters, but all these uniques have seemed at least good. Let's see if we can keep that streak up with this aloe vera. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 3, 1, 5. That stat line is pretty solid. Like I said with the Hatter, this is just a very similar stat line. It just has 1 extra. When you play me from reserve, you may pay 1. If you do, I gain a boost. So it would be a 4 mana 4/2/6. That's pretty good if you need to get over that hump. Like if your opponent has a 5 stat that you need to beat out, this gives you some options. I think this is solid. And then it just does the regular aloe vera effect, which is at noon resupply, so you just need a way to anchor this. In Muna, it's very easy to anchor your characters with hand cost 3 or less. Another good playable unique. And on to what I think is the last unique in the pack, Baba Yaga. And it's foil. I love this Baba Yaga art, and being foil, this is so pretty. 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 1/1/0. The effect better be powerful for that stat line. When you play me from anywhere, if you control 1 or more landmarks, characters you control gain 1 boost. That's pretty powerful. In Ortis, you're often going wide, what they say in card games, which means playing a bunch of tokens or characters and spreading them out. So this says if you control 1 or more landmarks, all of your characters gain a boost. That's not bad. I think this is pretty good. And then the second line of text says, when I go to reserve from the expedition zone, draw a card. So Baba Yaga, famously known for drawing cards, I think this is perfectly playable. I mentioned this earlier, but Ortis doesn't usually play a ton of landmarks, but if you are, you can really boost up your characters with this card. You can get it from both hand and reserve. This also includes itself, it's not other characters. So if you have a landmark, this comes in as a 2/2/1 for 3, and if you're playing Sigismar, which already has a 1/1/1 in play, the stat line is pretty good here. It draws you a card. Again, I think this is a good playable unique. Absolutely insane. I cannot believe we hit a golden booster. How exciting. And then to follow it up, you have 4 unique foilers in this pack. And we're not even done. We still have several more packs here to open. Let's keep going. If you watched my last Kickstarter box opening video, I opened a Moonlight Jellyfish, and it was in the thumbnail. Another bittersweet opening. Like I said in the last video, Moonlight Jellyfish is actually banned or suspended in Altered right now, because there's a lot of ways that you can abuse it and replay them, especially the cheap ones. So let's check this one out. So 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 1/1/2. It says, when you play it from hand, you may discard a card from your reserve. If you do, I gain a boost. That's a pretty whatever effect. Boosting your Moonlight Jellyfish is not really what you're looking to do a lot of the time. You just want to sacrifice it and draw cards like the rare version does. The second line here is, when I'm sacrificed, if I'm not fleeting, put me in reserve. That's already what the Jellyfish does. That's expected. The third line says, at dusk, you may sacrifice me. If you do, draw a card. That's pretty good. It's a self-sacrifice, and it draws you a card. This card can actually draw you 2 cards, because you can play it on the front end, send it to reserve, and draw a card when you sacrifice it, and then the second time you play it, you can sacrifice it again and draw a card. It's always nice when a card can sacrifice itself, and it also could be a surprise to your opponent if they're not paying attention. Let's say you're playing Lindaway and your Maw is out. Your Maw says, when you sacrifice a character, put 2 boosts on me, and this sacrifices itself at dusk. The stat line is pretty good. I think this Jellyfish is pretty powerful. If it wasn't suspended, I'd be interested in trying it at least. We opened 16 uniques in that second box. What an absolutely unbelievable golden pack we hit. Honestly, I totally was not expecting that. I've only opened 3 Kickstarter booster boxes. Super lucky. I guess I have to quit while I'm ahead, right? After opening 23 uniques, I thought it might be fun to just make a tier list, you know, just comparing these uniques to each other. And there's so many here that I think we could kind of fill out most of this tier list. So let's give it a shot. Now, I'll define the criteria in that I'm just going to compare these to each other because I don't really know how else to do this in the grand scheme of uniques. I'm just going to compare them to each other and kind of go off vibes. For S tier, I'll define it as like really any slam dunk of a unique. It doesn't really matter what deck you put it in and it'll perform great. A tier will be fits in most decks, and if you're looking for a unique for your deck, it'll be a strong consideration. B will kind of just be any playable unique. If you just need to fill out the unique slots in your deck and you're just working with what you've got. For C, I'll consider that something like somewhere around the power level of the card that already exists, maybe slightly worse. And then D is going to be any unique that I would never play or consider. I don't actually know if we opened any Ds in today's box, but we'll see. So the first one on the list is Asmodeus. So Asmodeus is fond for me. It's one of the first rares I ever interacted with in Altered. The first starter deck I chose was the Lyra starter deck, and I remember playing Asmodeus in one of my first games. And I was fond of this card. The stat line was cool. Now this unique, it's really good. I mean, the stat line is great. For 4 mana from hand, it's a 4/6/6. 4 mana is kind of the maximum I'm willing to pay for characters most of the time anyway. From reserve, it's 5 mana, 4/6/6. But when you play it from reserve, if you control a landmark, that's an important note, you do get this conditional effect. Bravos doesn't play a ton of landmarks. I think they're really only playing the Haven Bravos Bastion. But I have seen some Bravos decks that are playing the Foundry, which this would synergize well with. I actually think this unique is quite good, and you could play it alongside Basira Hero. I'm going to give this an A tier. I think I feel confident about that. I may have to come back and reevaluate, but I'm feeling strong about that Asmodeus in A tier. So the next one on this list is Bravos Pathfinder. So 2 from hand, 3 from reserve, 1/4/2. I have Seasoned. Pretty simple unique here. The stat line is good for the mana cost. For 2 mana, you're going to win Mountain almost guaranteed against your opponent. In Lyra, it's pretty easy to put boosts on things. You've got Navinka Hero, you've got the All-In spell, plenty of other ways to put boosts on things. I think having Season is cool, and you don't see it very often, so I also think this is a strong contender for A tier. You won't often be using the support ability. I mentioned that earlier. It's because this character is Seasoned, so you're not going to want to discard it if you're playing it in a deck where you're putting boosts on it, unless that spell is really, really important. Again, I think this one just goes into A tier. So on to the next one, we've got Mowgli, which is 1 from hand, 2 from reserve, 2/1/1. The stat line's great for 1 mana. It's similar to an Ordish Trooper for most other factions. I'd be happy playing this on turn 1 with maybe a 2-drop to accompany it. I like that this card doesn't have any conditional effects. It doesn't rely on having landmarks. It's in Muna, and often those uniques care about having plants. It doesn't care about plants. When you play it from reserve, you may pay 1. If you do, target character gains 2 boosts. That's okay. Paying 2 mana for a 2/1/1 is pretty bad, but paying 3 mana for a 4/3/3 is pretty good. And you don't have to, you can pick another character, you don't have to pick itself, but you can pick itself, which is pretty nice. Portability, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. I don't think that's going to come up too often, in Muna at least. I think this card is perfectly playable and definitely one you'd consider in a Muna deck. It doesn't really synergize that well, because off the top of my head, I can't think of any Muna synergies that care about boosts. At least, not any meta or super powerful synergies that care about boosts right now. I really want to put this in A tier, but we're kind of crowding it, so I'll put this in B tier, but I don't feel good about it. The mana cost alone makes me want to put it in A tier, and we might reevaluate. Moving on to Baba Yaga. So this one was 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 1/1/0. That stat line is pretty atrocious, but the effect here I remember being good. So when you play me from anywhere, if you control 1 or more landmarks, characters you control gain a boost. So in Ortist and Sigismar, you're going to be playing a bunch of characters, and boosting them is going to be great. The restriction here is having landmarks. And now I went through 39 cards, and I checked to see what Sigismar decks are playing landmarks, if any. And it seems like most Sigismar decks are playing between 0 and 2 or 3 landmarks. I did see one Sigismar deck that performed well recently playing 5 landmarks, and that deck would love this. That deck was also playing Ortis Carrier, so I could see this slotting really nicely into a Sigismar deck playing Ortis Carrier. You could just go really wide. It'll also draw you a card if you play this from hand. I think this is another solid contender for A tier. This one was also foil, so I'm feeling strongly about that. Next up, we've got a Haven Trainee. So 2 from hand, 4 from reserve, 2/2/2. When you play me from reserve, you may pay 1. If you do, you may discard target character with hand cost 4 or more. Having removal on a character is pretty powerful. It's a bummer that when you play this from reserve and you add 1 mana to it, it becomes a 5 mana 2/2/2. That's pretty bad. There's not a ton of meta or popular decks right now that are playing characters with hand cost 4 or more. In Altered, if you spend your turn to tap out or spend all of your mana on a character that's 4 or more, you're often giving away too much information, and your opponent can just super easily play around that. The second line of text is, when another character joins your expeditions, you may have target character other than me lose fleeting. That can be good in a Bravos deck. There's a lot of fleeting synergies. From hand, I think this is a great card. 2 mana 2/2/2 that does this lose fleeting effect. It would synergize well with a lot of Bravos strategies. Like, imagine playing this and a Bravos Tracer right after. That would be incredible. You can just immediately have that Bravos Tracer lose fleeting and play it again the next turn. The downside is, if you ever want to play this from your reserve, it's at least 4 mana for a 2/2/2, and I don't really think that's ever going to be worth it. The support ability is just fine. Giving a character a boost is often what you'll probably do with this card, because I don't think you'll be playing this from reserve. I think this is just fine. It's weird saying that with a character that has removal stapled onto it, and I'll put it in the B tier. I could see an argument for C, though. Alright, so the next one is Kitsune. 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 0/2/3. When you play me from reserve, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, target character in your other expedition gains 2 boosts. I said this earlier, I think this card is pretty hard to evaluate, but the stat line is okay. It is nice that the second line of text here, when I go to reserve from the expedition zone, each player draws a card. It does fuel you for that first line of text. When you do go to play it from your reserve, you'll at least have 1 card in your hand you may want to put in your reserve. I don't love giving my opponent cards, so Kitsune as a card design in general is not that appealing to me. But I don't know. Like I said, this one's hard to evaluate. I think it's fine. This is probably a B, maybe a C tier for me. I mean, the tiers are getting a little anemic, so let's just toss one in C for now. I think it's fine. It could be B, not sure. On to Muna Caregiver. So 2 from hand, 1 from reserve, 0/2/0. When you play me from hand, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, up to 2 target characters each gain a boost. I think this is powerful. It would synergize well with some of the Muna strategies that like putting things in your reserve. There's already things like Keylon Elemental and Capellia that want to do those kind of things. You may be able to sequence this in a way where you put a Capellia into your reserve and then put boosts on it. I'm not actually sure if that would work, but if it does, that would be pretty powerful. And the support effect is already what Muna Caregiver does, and it's pretty good at giving something anchored. So in this scenario, this dream scenario of playing the Capellia, putting boosts on it, you can also anchor it the following turn because Capellia would be asleep. Granted, it's only going to be playable in some niche strategies, which makes me think it's probably a B tier, but maybe top of B tier. The mana cost is quite low, which I love. Onto Aloe Vera. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 3/1/5. It's a pretty decent stat line. A 3 mana character with 5 statistic in one region is pretty good. And when you play me from reserve, you may pay 1. If you do, I gain a boost. 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 3/1/5. I like the stat lines for that 3 mana. For 4 mana, you can have a 4/2/6, which, you know, if you need that flexibility to get over something, I think that's valuable to have. And then it just has the Aloe Vera regular effect stapled on at the end. At noon, resupply. I think this is just fine. I don't know if you'd ever play this over any other Aloe Vera in your Muna strategies, so I think I'm just going to toss this in C tier. Only because I think the regular Aloe Vera is probably better than this in most scenarios, only because you could slot in another unique that does something better for your strategy. Moving on to red. So 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 3/3/2. In most other iterations of red, it already has seasoned. When I go to reserve from the expedition zone, if I have 2 or more boosts, sabotage. I think this is pretty good because with cards like Helping Hand, you could easily get this sabotage effect multiple times. And having a big character for 3 mana with seasoned is pretty good. If you're not familiar, seasoned just means when it goes to the reserve, it doesn't lose its boosts. Bravos is already great at putting boosts on characters, so I think this is just great. Granted, I don't think you would play this in every single Bravos deck. I don't think it's quite S tier. It's probably an A tier for me. The support effect you're basically never going to use with seasoned characters. I mentioned that earlier, so I think this is pretty good. I'll put this in A tier. Moving on to Moonlight Jellyfish. So 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 1/1/2. The stat line is just fine. It's not great, but for 2 mana and this much text on the card, surely it's good, right? When you play me from hand, you may discard a card from your reserve. If you do, I gain a boost. That I don't think is really ever going to matter or be relevant on this card. Jellyfish typically care about being sacrificed, and the decks you're playing this in don't care about boosts. And if they do, you're not going to have a big reserve. That's a really conflicting line of text for me. Second line is the same thing that Jellyfish already does. When I'm sacrificed, if I'm not fleeting, put me in reserve. That's a lot of value on this card. And then the last line is, at dusk, you may sacrifice me. If you do, draw a card. So if you're not familiar, dusk is the phase when you determine who's winning the expedition zones. So you do lose the stats here, but you do get a free sacrifice effect in that this character that you play sacrifices itself for no additional cost. And drawing a card is great. You can draw 2 cards off of this if you play it from hand and then play it from reserve the following turn. So I think this Moonlight Jellyfish is great. It's not an S tier because you wouldn't play this in every Gizmir deck. You would only play this in Lindaway. Also, this card is suspended, so I don't know if that should dock points. I think I'm not going to consider the suspension, so I'm just going to toss this in A tier. Moving on to Loki. So 8 from hand, 6 from reserve, 666. That is super expensive. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm almost never grabbing characters that cost 4 mana, or more than 4 mana, really. When you play me from hand, you may send target character to reserve. Now, having removal stapled onto a character, very good. This one also is not conditional. It doesn't require landmarks, extra mana, or anything. But since this is 8 mana, you're likely only going to play this card on your turn. So if you're the first player, you don't get any effect from playing this from your hand, unless they're playing Anchored Strategies or Asleep or something of that nature. So second line is, at dusk, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, each player discards their hand, then draws 3 cards. I really don't think that's very good, because it's at dusk, which means you play this 8 mana card, your opponent then can spend the rest of their turn doing whatever they want, knowing that you have the option to make them discard and draw 3 cards. So they can just play out their entire hand. Since you played 8 mana for your 1 card, they're going to play multiple, and if you're down on resources and they know you're going to draw cards, I don't know. It's too easy to play around. I don't think this card's very good. I think this might be the first D tier. Now, the alternate art is awesome. Big fan of the art, and it was foil, but doesn't redeem it out of D tier for me. Moving on to the Hatter, so 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 035. Stat line is pretty good. Mentioned that earlier. This is kind of similar to the Aloe Vera in that this has a 5 statistic in one of the regions, which you're often going to win if you're just spending 3 mana on a character. So when you play me from anywhere, you may have target character other than me lose fleeting. Being able to replay your characters can be pretty valuable. The stat line is fine, and the support ability is pretty good if you end up playing this in a deck like Finn and Crowbar. Up to 1 target character with hand cost 3 or less other than me gains Anchored when you discard this from your reserve. I think this is just fine. I think I'd put this in the B tier, and I'll feel happy with that. Moving on to Ortis Attorney, so 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 222. The stats are pretty okay, not terrible. It says, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, draw a card. I always love drawing cards. It's one of the best things you can do in Altered. The stat line is fine for giving you a card, but you kind of have to rely on losing that expedition. Second line of text says, when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, create 2 Ortis Recruit 1/1/1 soldier tokens in my expedition. That's pretty good for 3 mana, assuming you play this in a zone that you're intending to lose or have no shot at winning. You'll get to draw a card and make 2 bodies for the next turn. I think this is pretty powerful. This is kind of universal. You could play this in any Ortis deck. There's no conditions besides just needing to lose your expedition. I think this earns a spot in A tier, but I could be convinced this is a B tier. Moving on to Sneezer Shroom. So 2 from hand, 2 from reserve, 201. Those stats are not great, but this says when you play me from anywhere, I gain Anchored. Now, if you know anything about the meta, Afanis is one of the best decks right now, and Afanis is one of the best decks because of uniques like Spindle Harvesters, and I'll put an example of one up on the screen. But that Spindle Harvester will anchor itself, and Afanis, when you play spells, will put boosts on the Spindle Harvesters. Importantly, the really, really good Spindle Harvesters will return spells to your hand, so that you can sort of infinitely, quote-unquote, loop these helping hand cards with Spindle Harvesters. This card is lacking that ability to return spells to your hand, but it gains Anchored from both hand and reserve. The mana cost is cheap, the stats are fine. This is kind of a poor man's Spindle Harvester unique for Afanis. I think this is perfectly playable. I wouldn't consider this an S tier, but I do think it's kind of close, probably an A tier. Moving on to the Council, so 4 from hand, 4 from reserve, 452. That stat line is pretty solid for a 4-drop. And this just has the regular effect that the Council normally comes with, which is all of the activated, or I guess triggers of characters facing me don't activate. Personally, I haven't found that effect to be super impactful. You basically never see anyone playing this card, but I could see this being playable. When another character joins your expeditions, if I have 1 or more boosts, target character gains a boost. So this is in Bravos. Bravos is good at giving boosts to their characters. This is just going to amplify your boosting effects. It is a little bit expensive to amplify your boost effects, especially since you want to play this first. I'm not sure. I think this is probably a B tier, maybe even C. Just the stat line is fine. I think I'm going to put it bottom of B. No, you know what? I mean, no one plays Council, right? That first line doesn't really matter. The second line's fine, but it's a little too expensive. I'm going to go with C tier. Moving on to the Axiom Scrambler. This is 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/3/2. Says, when you play me from hand, robots you control other than me gain 1 boost. This can be good in Axiom. Axiom's already trying to make robots, and the stat line is just fine for what you're getting. Second line says, when I leave the expedition zone, you may put a card from your hand in reserve if it's a permanent sabotage. Axiom loves to play permanents. Axiom also loves to put cards from their hand into reserve. There's also not a ton of downside to putting permanents in your reserve because you don't get a chance to play them a second time anyway. They either stick or they go to the discard pile. So I think this card is just fine. The support ability is almost never going to come up, I don't think. The next character you play this turn gains 1 boost if you discard this from your reserve. There's not a ton of boost synergies in Axiom. This one is relevant because it gives robots boosts, but just giving one random character a boost isn't going to do a whole lot for you. I could see this being played in like a Subosh deck, and I think it earns its spot in B tier. Now, moving on to Ratatosker. So 2 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/2/1. Stat line's already pretty good from hand especially. This says, when you play from anywhere, if you control 1 or more landmarks, create an Ordis Recruit 1/1/1 in my expedition. So for 2 mana, just for having a landmark, which we've talked about before, Ordis doesn't play a ton of them, but just for having a landmark, you can make 3/3/2 worth of stats for 2 mana and a second body, which is relevant for Ordis a lot of the time. The second line here says, when you play me from reserve, create 2 Ordis Recruit 1/1/1 soldier tokens in my expedition. So for 3 mana, and if you control a landmark, you can make 3 bodies, 3 1/1/1s. I think this card is very good. You slap this into a deck with Sigismar and maybe a couple of Ordis carriers, some monoliths, and this card would be excellent. I think it would be an all-star in your deck. So I think this is actually an S tier. I could see high A, but we don't have anything in S yet, and I think this card is pretty good. Moving on to Quetzalcoatl. So 4 mana from hand, 3 from reserve, 5/4/3. 4 mana 5/4/3, I'd be happy to play. And 3 mana from reserve, I'd be very happy to play that for that rate. And this just has the standard Quetzalcoatl effect here. When an opponent draws 1 or more cards or resupplies, we can put boosts on things. So up to 2 target characters each gain a boost. What's nice is that this can target itself with those boosts. The downside of this Quetz is that it's not 3 mana from hand, and a lot of the Muna anchor abilities can only target things that cost 3 or less, just like the support ability on this Quetz itself. It says up to 1 target character with hand cost 3 or less other than me gains anchored. So that's very common wording on the Muna faction. Sadly, this can't be targeted by those effects, so you lose out on this ability to see when your opponent's going to draw or resupply. So I think that firmly knocks this out of A, probably out of B tier. It's much harder to anchor and get to stick around, so I'm probably going to slam this into C tier, despite the stats being very good. Next up is Tiny Jin. So this is 3 from hand, 3 from reserve, 2/4/0. Not amazing stats, just pretty whatever. This says, when I leave the expedition zone, if you control 1 or more landmarks, put me in my owner's mana zone. Again, we're talking about conditionals. Bravos doesn't play very many landmarks. I do think ramping is good and pretty underrated in this game. Granted, there's not a ton of amazing payoffs, especially in Bravos for ramping super high. But as more cards are printed, I think cards like this will become more valuable, or valuable in the sense of ramping you. At dusk, if I have 1 or more boosts, sabotage. So putting boosts on characters in Bravos is pretty trivial, so you can get the sabotage effect for not much investment. I think this card is just fine. I don't think it's amazing. Maybe I'm missing an interaction that would make this card great, but I think this is just a B or maybe even C tier. Next up, we've got a Thoth. So 4 from hand, 4 from reserve, 2/2/3. Not great stats. I would not be super happy paying 4 mana for a 2/2/3 most of the time. But this says, when you play me from anywhere, you may pay 1. If you do, you may send to reserve target character with hand cost 3 or less. So paying an extra mana to get a off you go stapled onto a character, that can be solid. 3 hand cost characters or less are the most common characters people play, but if you want that effect, you'd have to spend 5 mana on a 2/2/3. This second line is just what Thoth already does, which is when my expedition fails to move forward during dusk after rest, make an Ordis Recruit. That's solid. I don't think this card is exceptional. Having a support ability of After You can be pretty good. If you're not familiar, After You just says you have to make the next action, and then I can choose what I'm going to do. I don't know. I hate that these uniques sometimes have the stapled on, you can pay 1 additional mana, because your mana is already so choked and altered. I think this card is pretty solidly in C tier. I could even be convinced to put this right into D tier. Next up is Joan of Arc. So 5 from hand, 4 from reserve, 4/2/4. okay stats, not stellar. When I leave the expedition zone, if you control 2 or more landmarks, create a 2/2/2 brass bug robot token in each of your expeditions. This is a really steep cost, having to control 2 landmarks to get 2 brass bugs, and the mana cost on this is already relatively high. I don't think this card is very good. And the supportability doesn't synergize very well with what Axiom is looking for. We just covered that earlier. I think this card is going to find its way into the D tier for me. Alright, only 2 left. So this one is Ortis Gatekeeper. 3 from hand, 4 from reserve, 2/0/2. When you play me from anywhere, create an Ortis recruit in each of your expeditions. That is an excellent effect. So for 3 mana, you're getting essentially 4/2/4 worth of stats and kind of spread out across bodies. This thing by itself makes 3 bodies just for 3 mana. So in a Sigismar deck, if you're playing the Monolith like they sometimes do, you're going to make a ton of statistics with this card. And spreading out is really good for cards like Teamwork Training and Charge that Sigismar is often looking to play, and this triggers from hand or reserve. This also has another line of text. When you play me from reserve, you can pay an additional 1 mana if you do draw a card. I love that flexibility. If I need the card, I can pay 5 mana. I think this card is excellent. And then it just has a supportability added on top if you need it. I think this card is clearly an S tier, and if you don't agree, then I don't know what to tell you. Saving the best for last, we have an Isatok, 7 from hand, 8 from reserve, 2/2/2. Absolutely atrocious stats for that much mana. The stat line is pretty weak since it can be targeted by things like Tiny Jail and Avalanche, but the effects are very good. So this first line is already what Isatok does, which says your other expedition and the expedition facing it can't move forward. So you're stalling out on one side. But this second line is insane. So when played from anywhere, draw 3 cards. That is an extremely powerful thing to do in Altered. Every single card in your deck is gas. Being able to just draw 3 cards and prevent one of your lanes from advancing, I think this is absolutely very, very powerful. This happens when you play it from hand or reserve, so you can stall 2 turns in a row and draw 3 cards. The stat line is pretty terrible though, so you're likely gonna lose the lane that you're playing this in, but at least you're stalling the other one. This is a great way to refill your hand, and easily one of the best uniques I opened. Alright, and I suppose that does it. Thank you so much for watching. If I missed any interactions, or you think some of these uniques are better or worse than I evaluated them, let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.